Hello, everyone. This is a workshop at the 2021 International Conference of the System Dynamics Society titled Feedback Rich Model Construction with PowerSim Studio. I'm Len Malchinsky. Jake Jacobson might also be helping. We're both from Mind's Eye Computing, an authorized reseller of PowerSim Studio in the United States. Okay. So you're here for a reason. You want to learn about PowerSim Studio. Let's think about something first. Do you struggle when you're building models? Maybe you're a newcomer to system dynamics. Maybe you've been building models for quite some time. How do I start? What do I do first? How do I manage units in my models? How do I know what the model is doing while it's running? What about debugging? I'm not sure I did a good job or something's not working right. How do I handle that? And then, how do I manage output? What is being output from my model? And how will I know what it is and when? So first I'm going to describe Studio. Studio is a piece of software, right, that enables a construction of system dynamics and discrete event simulation models. It actually does both. Okay, they can be purely system dynamics models. The models can be completely discrete event simulations, or they can be both. Studio is a Microsoft compliant tool. I'm sorry if you're a Mac user. The only way you can run Studio on a Mac is to get a Windows emulator. Studio enforces the system dynamics methodology. That's an interesting point. It's not a language like Fortran or Java or C++ where you can do just about anything you want, but it guides you through the process of using the system dynamics methodology. Now, there are ways to override that and use Studio as a more generic programming tool, but I recommend you don't do that, at least not at the beginning. Okay? One of the things I really appreciate is the interactive development environment, what's called the IDE on Studio. I've been using versions of Studio since about 1993, I believe. What can it do for you? Well, I truly believe it can make you a better modeler because of the way it enforces the methodology. That interactive development environment helps a lot. It can extend your system dynamics models. You can do extensive work with arrays, database connections, Excel, and even defining your own functions. It can let you build outstanding applications. What do I mean by application? Well, many of us build models, but we don't build user interfaces to those models. Once you combine a model with a user interface, you have what I call an application. There's a wide breadth of interface tools, and each of the tools is very deep, has many, many features. We might see a few of those today. So, if you go to the PowerSim Studio website, you can get lists of all these features. Gosh, I could spend days explaining them, but I'm only going to look a little bit at the highlighted features here. Automatic unit control, the function library. I probably will skip reference runs, depends how much time we have. I'll talk about arrays, and I will look at Microsoft Excel spreadsheet connections to Studio. Okay, as I said, it's Microsoft Windows compliant. The interactive development environment is customizable, moving menus around, etc. It also has what Microsoft calls the MDI. So here I've got Studio open, but I've got 4 interfaces or 4 screens within Studio. I've got a model drawing screen. I've got a equation listing screen here. I've got a screen that shows all my units. And then I've got a screen here where I could show my array management or subscript management, those of you coming from VenSim. Okay, lots of menus, lots of tools. Some people truly believe that Studio has so many features that they are afraid to start using it. But since it's customizable, you can hide many of the features, you can move them around. Let me get my pointer here. Standard Windows type of menu system, file, edit, view, etc. Down here on the far right, never to be forgotten, help. Things that we're used to seeing, open, save, print, etc. Undo and do forward. What else have we got here? The actual system dynamics tools, stock, auxiliary, flow rates, information links, etc. Play buttons. It's a very, very rich and powerful tool. Here are a bunch of the interface tools. They're right here at this level on the diagram. Okay. I just highlight here that you can build models that have 2 languages. What I mean by that is, let's say you've built the dynamics and you'd like to show it in this case, Norwegian and English. Well, Studio lets you do that. Very nice. Okay, we are going to build a simple model here in the workshop. Simple population growth model with an initial population of 1,000 persons, a stock or a level called population, which is the integral of the growth rate. Its initial value is initial population. The growth rate is 1.1% per year. And I'm going to increase the population by multiplying it times the growth rate. I'm using specific naming conventions that were developed at MIT. If you'd like to look up this D memo, there it is. And you might ask yourself, how would I start such a model in Studio? Well, I could do it a couple of ways. I could use the blank workspace, which is typically used by more experienced modelers, or I could use the wizard, which is great for beginners or if you've forgotten how to do things. Okay. But first, I'm going to take a step back and show some of the features. Here we go. Once Studio is open, this is typically what you'll see when you start to build a new model. If you choose File, New, you'll see a new project wizard. You can also turn the wizard off so it doesn't show up, and this is what happens when you get more experienced. You know what to do. What does the wizard help with? It'll let you choose the language, the compatibility to older versions of Studio. Through time, Studio's added many new features. All of your teammates and or collaborators might not have the same version you have, so you need to make a decision. You want to turn on time unit consistency because essentially that's the system dynamics methodology. You can choose your calendar. We'll see that in a few minutes. Whether or not you want to use series variables, which if you know VenSim is very similar to Synthesim. And then you can set up your time range of the simulation. From 1 to 100 time steps, from June 9th, 2021 to June 9th, 2100, for example. Okay? And there are even more detailed settings. You can dive down deeper beyond the wizard to change simulation settings, and project settings. Once you've set up the wizard, you'll see a screen like this. There's your model worksheet, your canvas, so to speak. Here are your modeling tools, stocks, flows, connectors, auxiliaries, constants. The Project Explorer, allowing you to keep track of all the things in this particular project. And then your Task Assistant, which helps you with help and other kinds of things, reminders. As you get more experience with Studio, you typically turn that off. And then the global settings. How to handle ranges, that's what the term Studio uses for array management, and then how to manage your units. And then a very nice feature if you're doing modular modeling, model tabs. I think it allows up to about 500 model tabs, so you can put pieces of your model on different tabs and of course rename them appropriately. You can go down into more detailed settings. I hinted at that earlier. Pick the type of calendar. When does the model start running? What's your time step? Some interesting things like, should I maximize the speed at which the model runs? Or customize it? Rarely will you use real time because it literally means real time. If your DT is 6 months, it will take 6 months for the model to progress one time step. So not very useful unless you're modeling at the second or minute time scale, or DT. In the project settings, my gosh, you have so many options. Compatibility with previous versions, the ability to manage different data input sets in Excel. How do you want to deal with Excel? Would you like to have a relational database connection? Would you like your model to open in presentation mode? Would you like to have sidebars on your interface screen, which are links to dynamic HTML? How do you want to handle time? And then even more advanced features on the size of the model. How many microprocessors would you like to use? Things which most people don't look at least not at the beginning. The commonly used stuff is here. The simulation objects from System Dynamics. The interface tools, you can see that's cut off on the right. The run controls, I call them the VCR, video cassette recorder buttons. Reset my model, run my model at full speed, or single step my model. How do I handle my arrays? How do I handle my units? Let's take a look at units. When a model is created using the wizard, Studio typically will pick a whole bunch of units and set them up for you in advance. And then you, of course, are welcome to add more units, both internal system units or user-defined units. You can create new units at any point in time. In fact, if you're defining a variable and you use an unknown unit, Studio immediately prompts you to create that unit and make it valid. Here in the middle is some of the standard built-in units, right? And I just highlighted currency. These are the built-in currency units here. Really powerful unit management. So if I wanted to create a new unit called persons, I'd say I'm going to call it person here, and the plural name is persons. The software figures out whether it's more than one. All right. It's an atomic unit because it has no link to the standard international units. It's not currency, it's not derived based on another built-in unit, and it's not a customized unit. You can always, though, add units for conversion and aggregation. For example, millions of persons based on person. Studio will do all that math in the background. You have no need to put converters on your model screens. You can also switch from one system of measurement to another. For example, creating a foot as a unit of length, which we do here in the United States, and basing that on an international unit, meter. Always check to see if Studio already has your unit built in. And one thing that I've done a lot of modeling in the electricity problem domain. Just create a model that has nothing but the units I need and save it as a template. And every time I start a new project, I open that template, save it with a new project name. I don't have to worry about repeating unit creation. Okay, just a couple of definitions here. Okay, back to building the model. Same stuff I showed before. I just use a studio icon to show that this is a stock or a level. If you're familiar with other software, it's typically a rectangle. Studio has a special icon for constants, initial population and growth rate in this case, and then there's the symbol for a rate. Okay, more detailed before we open Studio. The define window is very detailed. As you can see, there's the actual equation, documentation, advance, scale, value, line, fill, symbol. So many things you can literally get lost, but very powerful. Studio uses inline definition of units. So if this were a stock and its initial value was 100 persons, I would put 100 and use these delimiters to say person. So there's no reason to have an equation where you've got a literal number without units on it. It keeps your modeling correct and honest. You have documentation features. You'd like to say where you got the data from, what's the name of the website, what's the textbook, etc., etc. It's also got another documentation field for notes. It's got this interesting feature called scale, where you can limit the range of a variable, particularly useful for constants, not so much for stocks. Design, wow, so many capabilities with design, coloring, patterns, pictures, line shape, truly incredible. And then advanced, depending on what kind of variable, you can hit the permanent button there and keep values between simulations. That allows you to do a run, set a slider, do another run, but keep that old slider set. Some things you can do here with flow rates. This is how you allow discrete event simulation. This connection is transfers to and from Excel. Lots of functions, more than 200 of them. Features that none of the other major softwares have. Here are the functions broken down into groups, and this would have been the full list here. Okay, it's also got what's called context-sensitive help. So I'm building an equation here, and I'm using a graph or a table function, and I forget the syntax of that graph function. So I can literally, in the definition window, select help, click on the function name, and that will be in blue because Studio knows that that's a reserved word. And up will come context-specific help to that function called graph. I haven't shown it all here, but it'll give a description, it'll list all the parameters, it will give examples of how to use it, And at the very bottom of this scrollable window, it will show you other functions that are like graph. So maybe you made a mistake and you really didn't want the graph function. So at the bottom, you can see other related functions. Okay, if you start building a model in Studio, in Vensim, and put objects on the screen, this is what you'll see. That's typically what you would see in I think. This is what you see in Studio. Something is going on. Why is Studio giving me all these messages? That's just the way it works. That's why I call this feedback rich. It lets you know how well you're modeling, how well you're enforcing the system dynamics method, how well you're managing the syntax of the software. In Vensim, if you click the equations icon, everything turns black. Now it's finally telling you there's something wrong. And in IC Systems, in the model view, it's giving you a warning message. IC Systems Stella Architect is relatively new, and this feature is relatively new. Studio shows you the same thing. Okay, let's go on to the modeling. So what I'm going to do is end the slideshow. Lost my cursor. Minimize that. Bring a PowerSim Studio screen down here into my recording window. Let's maximize it. Let's see if I can build that population model. It's possible that you've printed out these slides. I'm going to try to do this from memory. I'm going to grab a constant, and I'm going to call that initial population. And I'm going to define it right here. Equals 1, 2, 3, 1,000. Unit delimitator. Person. And hit enter. And Studio immediately enforces syntax. This definition refers to a non-existing unit called person. Do you want to create it? Well, I sure do. And it automatically pops up the person window for the units. I put in a plural. I go next. I say it's atomic. It's not based on anything else. Finish. And I've got a running model. It does nothing. But there are no errors in this model. This is my recommended way of doing things. It's always running. Let me get my next constant. If you recall, it's growth rate. It happens to be equal to 1.1 unit delimitator percent per year. Percent and YR are internal Studio units already built in. I got a model running that does nothing, but it's 100% correct. Okay? This is the way I model. I do my constants first. It's called outside in. Now I go to my stocks, or levels. Studio calls them a level. I click. And that was population, if you recall. And it's giving me a message here. Doesn't know what it is. So I'm going to get an information link. Click it. Click on initial population. Drag it into population. Double click population to define it. And I'd like you to keep your eyes right here if you can. I'll double click initial population, and it automatically inherited the unit person, but it named it persons because it knows it's greater than 1. I can hit apply and OK, or I can hit enter twice. I'll click OK. My model is still running, 100% correct. What's left? Let's get a flow rate here. Click out to the left and then drag. And I'm going to call this population growth. This is a net growth. Of course, it's not happy. You put it on the screen. Actually, what does that message say? No definition is provided for the variable. Some people I know don't like this. They would like to be able to draw a model, whether the logic is correct or the syntax is correct, and not see any error messages. You can't do that directly in Studio, but you can click this little design mode window and that will make the errors disappear. If I click back, they show up. So what's population growth? Well, it's the growth rate times the population. I will double click the link to make it persistent. Click from population into here. Click from growth rate into here. Whoops. And now go back to my selector to turn off the link. Open this up, and this is simply growth rate. Here I will make the text bigger. I hold down the control key and scroll my mouse wheel. Makes the text bigger. Space, times, space, whoops, one space, population. Boom. Automatically calculates it, automatically figures out the unit. Hit apply and OK. I have a running model. No errors, no inconsistencies, no units problems, no model logic problems at all. I'll go to simulation, look at my settings, which I didn't do. Gosh, I probably don't want a time step of a day. I'm going to make my time step 0.5 years or 180 days, and I'm going to run it for, let's see, 2020 to 2120 for 100 years at maximum speed. I'm going to use Euler integration, and I'm going to ignore these for right now. Okay, so the model runs. What can it tell me? Here's something I think that Studio is very, very strong at. I'm going to right click and pick Show Auto Report. Right click, Show Auto Report. This is telling me, let me zoom in here to fit. This is telling me exactly what the values are at the start of the run. If I single step 1 dt, which remember is a half a year, it's telling me what the growth rate is and how many people I have. I can also just run it to the end. Okay. Let me go back to 150%. And now I'd like to see a graph of what's going on. Grab a time graph, give it some real estate, click and hold population, drop it on, my graph is done. It's that simple. If I'd like to change the parameters, the features of the graph, I double click on the edge of it. I can see the parameters. I can see the time axes. If you're planning on building a user interface, it's good to decide many of these things in advance so that you know what you're doing. Otherwise, you could possibly have hundreds of graphs to change. I'm going to make the minimum on that y-axis 0. So it just moved that up to here. And you know what? I think I'm going to go to the fill. And the fill on the graph area, I'm going to make it a solid, but I don't want it to be white. I'm going to make it this interesting blue color. So there are many, many combinations. I don't know if it's infinite, but literally hundreds. Okay? I can also do a table and draw population on there. Make this table a bit wider. Make this guy a bit wider. Okay. Notice by default it's doing this every 20 years. Again, I can double click on the edge. And I can get the report interval to be whatever I want. I can make it every time step. So on January 1st, July 1st, January 1st, July 1st. Why those dates? If I go to project settings, what did I do with time? I said, well, let's use a bank calendar, right? All models are abstractions of reality. My time abstraction, change this to year actually, is going to be a bank calendar, 12 months of 30 days. I can go so far as to say I want a Gregorian calendar, where I would know that today, June 9th, 2021 is a Wednesday, if that's important to me in my modeling. I can also ignore calendars and do calendar independent. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and use whatever unit I want. I always leave time unit consistency on because that's system dynamics. Let's hit apply here and we're all set. Okay? Hopefully I didn't go too fast. No worries, you'll see links to places you can learn how to do this later. Okay? So I'm going to move this up. Oh, sorry, I wanted to show one other thing. I want to put some Excel data in here. I've got an Excel file open on my other monitor. I'll just pull it down. The values here aren't important, or what I was doing is not important. I want to get a series of 10 constants and bring them into my model. I go to Excel, I highlight and get my 10 items. I move to the edge, my cursor changes, click and hold down the left mouse button. That data is now in my model. It's that easy. It's got a path name, which I typically will get rid of, because if I send this model to someone else, I don't want their computer to create this path. And I'd store my Excel file and my model in the same folder in my Windows operating system. Again, I can use auto report and it will show me those. Right? They're constant, so they're not going to change over time. Okay, I'm going to go back and get my PowerPoint. I have to do a little bit here to get this to work the way I want to. Almost there. Okay. So we were here. We went on to the modeling. Just recalling what we did. Okay. You can export equations quite simply to Excel, and then from Excel, of course, to anything you want. This is just a sample view where I'm showing, let me get my pointer back. I'm showing the variable name, its unit, its definition, its current value, any documentation, any notes, the variable type. Here are constants and some auxiliaries. The user has control over what they would like to show here. And this is a conversion from Dynamo. If any of you try this, I recommend keeping the Dynamo name, which was typically 4 characters, maybe 6, and then literally writing out the entire phrase. Very, very helpful if you're trying to match old Dynamo output. Okay. It does links to Excel, which I've shown. It also does relational database links, and it interestingly has its own internal data set. And all the years I've been modeling, gosh, more than 25, I think now, I've only used it once. A client received a model from us and an Excel data file, which was an input file. They started to change the values in the Excel file so the model would produce the kind of results that they wanted to see. Not what probably would happen, but what they wanted to see. So we just used the internal studio data set, password protected the model, and now they couldn't go in and do the equivalent of change history. Now, I already did this, I'm ahead of myself. Okay, arrays. Arrays add detail, not dynamics. Right? You want to get a model running first before you start adding detail with arrays. With arrays, you can also have different data elements in the array have different dynamics be applied to them using things like if statements and looping. You can also name array elements. You saw earlier I did a 1 through 10, but what if those were the names of cities? It's very easy in Studio to get a list of those cities from a word processor or type them in by hand, and every time you display that data, it'll show you the city name. Studio has a maximum of 6 dimensions on their arrays, and you can read and write 6-dimensional arrays from Excel. Okay? The conclusion here. I believe this is the most powerful tool on the market. It's got a feedback-rich model construction environment. It's got wonderful unit handling and unit inheritance. The biggest model I've worked on, a little bit more than 3,000 variables. We loaded about 8 million pieces of data once the model started to run. 6-dimensional arrays, and it has do loops. If you have any programming experience, you can loop through arrays. You can do collaboration. It can keep track of who changed what variable when. You can create reusable pieces of code and link to them or copy and paste them from one model to another. You can do hierarchical modeling, submodels in a larger model, and even sub-submodels. Really good documentation. It also can do on-screen comments. I might show that here after the slides. Nice help system. 200 plus functions. Nice interface capacity. If you sit in on the Designing Interfaces workshop, you'll see some examples. And then if you're stuck, or if you want to extend system dynamics methodology to operations research, or things of that sort, you can create your own functions internally in VBScript or make external calls to C++ routines. Oh yeah, and it's got the wizard. So I believe I've answered the questions. How to start, how to manage units, knowing what the model is up to, help with debugging, knowing how to produce some output, and even more. So there's the PowerSim website. They're located just north of Bergen, Norway, short bus ride from downtown Bergen. Studio 10 is the current version, but these folks have been in the business system dynamics modeling since 1988. There are different tools depending on your needs and your ability to pay. I was using Expert today. That's what I own and use in my consulting and teaching practice. Premium is the high end. The one thing I remember about Premium is it allows you to have up to 10 million values in a single variable. So an array that has 10 million values stored in one variable. Expert, I think, is 500,000 max. If you're a student, there's an academic version. There's a free runtime, so if you build a model with an interface and you'd like to distribute it to people to run on their computers, you can distribute that with what's called Cockpit. There's Express. Some of you may have downloaded that. That's free. The model size is limited, I think, to 50 variables. And some of the array sizes, I think, are limited to 100. There's also a software development kit and a workstation version if you'd like to build your own models and port them to the internet. There are 3 or 4 companies that also provide other model-to-web applications. Of course, you're welcome to build your own. Okay. You can get, again, Studio Express here, or the full version, which has a 30-day limited license here. If you go to our website, that Jake and I maintain, Mind's Eye Computing, we've got more than 90 models that will run in the free Studio Express, free to download. The models from John Sturman's book, the models that George Richardson developed for teaching, the models from Hartmut Bosel's System Zoo, Jim Hines's Molecule System, which I don't think will run in Express because it's too big. But there's a lot of free stuff. There's also a free independent user group. And watch out for this S here. It should be at the end. I keep forgetting to correct. It's independent of the PowerSim company. There are literally hundreds of free models there, messaging board, other interesting kinds of things. So what I might do now is I'm going to end the slideshow and close the PowerPoint and just go back to PowerSim Studio just to show you a couple of more features. I'm going to maximize this so I get a little bit more real estate. Let's take a quick look at the help. I can go to contents here. Let me pull the help window down from my other screen and get it to be the right size. Okay, so I've got a contents, I've got an index, I've got the ability to search, and of course I can store my favorites, things that I go back to from time to time. I wanted to make sure that you don't ignore contents. There's a lot of really interesting stuff here. I'll go down to functions. I can see an alphabetical list of all the functions, right? And as I click on them, I can go and visit them, right? I'm going to go to index here, and I'm just going to type in the word array. And what I'd like to do is find array functions, and this just gives me a list of all the things that I can do with arrays. Do I have any arrays in our simple model? Well, they're not useful arrays, but this Excel data is an array, right? It's bringing data in from, let me get this a little bit bigger. From this folder, it's an income.xlsx, it's on sheet 1, and it's all the data from row 2, column 2, through row 11, column 2. I can change that to use the Excel naming, but this is a relative reference, and that's just fine for me. One thing though, now that I have arrays, I can use these chart tools, create a chart and drop this guy onto there, run it again, and again, so many features. What would I like to show on this chart? Well, I don't want vertical lines. I'll do major horizontal. I'll go to parameters. What kind of graph do I want? A line graph, a step graph, a bar graph? I'm going to go to bar graph. Then I'm going to fill the bars on my graph. Whoops, my parameters, I'm going to fill them solid red. I'm going to go to the lines on those parameters. I'm going to make that red, hit apply, and now you see what I've got. One really nice thing that I really like is if this was the input to a table function, my user could go and change this. Maybe you're watching my cursor. If you watch down below, all those values are changing. That interface is already built. I can take this and just move them to a new tab and call it interface. Let this tab be called model. I'll rename it. And then I'll grab this guy. Standard Windows, I hit Shift. I've got them both. Drag it onto diagram 2. They're there. Rename this and call it interface. And I'm done. Oops, they're both still selected. Gee, you know, I'd like these both to be the same size. So click this one, hold down Shift, click this one, go to Layout, make same size. Go to Layout, align the top edges. Great. Go here and do a fit. I could talk about this for hours and hours, and it built some very, very sophisticated user interfaces. But this is just an introduction to PowerSim Studio. You're welcome to go to those websites. There are learning videos, sample models, all kinds of things. Don't forget there's a user group that's got a messaging system and hundreds of sample models. I don't know if I showed this single stepping. I'm running let's just run it, reset it. Quite slow here because I'm running 180 days at a time over 100 years. So it'll take me, what, 200 clicks to get the model to run to the end. That's it. I'm going to pause the recording. Don't hesitate to contact us or the PowerSim people if you have questions. Thanks a lot. Good luck.